We're in Chafal Hamad Aleph Bamine. It's 5 lines from the top. It's the second. It's the third paragraph in the 21A1. So we've been talking. Yeah, the Shalom Mimenu. Abaya is a question. So Bamine Shalu Oto. So we were talking about the Machlokas Beisham Beis Hillel. What korbanos can you shecht on Yom Tov? Can you shecht even a shlamim because you could eat it? But can you even shecht an ola even though you can't eat it? But it's related to the holidays. So we had different lashonos. Uh, According to Beis Hillel, it is okay. According to Beis Shammai, according to most opinions, it's not okay. But here's a question: what about behema chetzia? Bami Rav Avia Sava Rav Huna. The old Rav Avia, or the elder Rav Avia, asked from Rav Huna. Behema chetzia shel nachri chetzia shel Yisrael mal l'shachta b'yom tov. If an animal is owned in a partnership, it's half owned by a Jew and half owned by a non-Jew. Are you allowed to shecht it on Yantif? So what's the question? We mentioned that you're only allowed to shecht you're allowed to the heter of lachem. We had a bunch of drashos. The heter to cook on yantif is lachem, not for hektish, according to one opinion, but it seems that Beis Hillel doesn't hold like that because he says you can't bring an ola. Lachem velo lekusim, lachem velo leklavim. So you could cook for yourself. You can't cook for non-Jews. You can't cook for your domesticated animals like a dog, even though you have to. It depends on you for food. So we saw that drasha. So this animal, this behema, is partially owned by a non-Jew. Are you allowed to shecht it on Yantif? Because we understand if it was all owned by a Jew, you could shecht it on Yantif, so you could eat. But because this is partially owned by a non-Jew, maybe you're not allowed to. That's the question. Amarle Motor, he says it's allowed. Amarle v'chima bein zelin and darm l'davos. So what's the difference between this and voluntary korbanos? Voluntary korbanos are all owned by a Jew, or they were being brought by a Jew to the Beis Hamikdash. So if you're able to shecht this animal, which is partially not owned by a Jew, why is that worse than a korban? Amarle Orva Parach. He said a raven flew by. So Rashi says he's changing the subject. Kinafak, when Rav Avia left, Amarle Rabba Bray, Rabba Rav Huna's son asked, Lav Hainu Rav Avia Sava de Mishtabach Le'mar Begave. Isn't that the elder of Avia, who master, meaning you, my father, has praised him, Digavar Rabba, who you said he's a great man. So why didn't you answer his question? Obviously, you respect him a lot. Why did you change the subject to make him go away? Amar le uma avidle. What could I do for him? Ani hayom samchuni bashishus rabduni b'tapuchim. Uh, Sustain me with dainty cakes, spread apples for me. So it seems that this day was Yantif, and Rashi says that day was Yantif, and Rav Huna was giving a drasha for many hours in the day, and he is too tired to deal with the question. So he says, bring me food right now. I mean, this pasuk was from Koheles, I think, of Shiramalos. Excuse me, Shirashirin. Sustain me with dainty cake, spread apples about me. I need food, and he asked me something that needs an explanation, and I am too tired and too wiped out right now to give it to him. So what time am I? So what is that reason that you're allowed to shecht an animal that's partially owned by a non-Jew, but you're not allowed to bring a korban, which is all owned by a Jew, but it's not something that needed to be brought today on Yantif. So the Gemara says, Yisrael, an animal that's half owned by a Jew and half owned by a non-Jew, you're allowed to shecht it Yom Tov. The efshar l'kazayis basar below shchita. It's impossible to eat even a kazayis of meat without shechting it. So if the Jew wanted to eat it, there's no way around doing shchita. But voluntary korbanos, you're not allowed to shecht them in Yom Tov. Because when a Kohen gets a portion of the animal, they get it from Hashem, the high table. So it's not considered that it so the portion of the Kohanim are getting, Rashi says the chazay v'shok. One of the, I think it's a rear leg and the breastbone, and the owners get other meat. But it's like a servant getting something from his master. So even though Jews eat from it, it's really to Hashem, and it happens to be Hashem allows us to eat from it, but it's not considered being that you're shechting it in order for a person to eat from it. A person will eat from it, but it's going to Hashem, Shulchan Gavoah. And Hashem doesn't need it on Yantif. So therefore, there's no heter to shech that these Nidar Nedavos on Yantif. Amar of Chista. So right now we're actually going to get into a sugya of cooking for a non-Jew on Yantif. I'm not going to go into great depth. This actually is something that we could potentially go into greater depth on Shavuos night if you want.
For non-Jew?
Yeah, on Yantif. Can you invite a non-Jew for Yantif?
Oh, okay.
Because the drasha is lachem v'lo lekusim, lachem v'lo leklavim. So it seems you're not inviting it, but if you're inviting them for a meal, you're going to be cooking for them. But you invite them, you're cooking for your invited guests too. If you invite people, you're cooking. And again, this also, like we mentioned before Pesach, it would include even warming up food that was already cooked.
Probably don't want to get into it now, but how about like health, natural health on that?
So that might be slightly different, and it might be related to part of the sugya. Well, no, Shabbos isn't a problem because we're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. You're allowed to definitely have a non-Jew for Shabbos because you can't cook for yourself either. And when you're warming up on Shabbos, what we warm up is not considered bishul. Because if it's considered bishul, we're not allowed to do it for ourselves on Shabbos either. So for a non-Jew on Shabbos, there's definitely not a problem. This is for Yantif. And where the serious shaila comes up, well, there are two cases. One is people who want to become gerim, so they have to be at someone's house for Yantif to see how Yantif works. So that's a big shaila, how to deal with that. And then also we had the shaila. It comes up in other cases also, but when the first time I was a little kid, but we had people immigrants from the former Soviet Union, or was from still the Soviet Union at the time. And there was a Jewish woman married to a non-Jewish husband, and kids are Jewish. It's Pesach or Yantif. We want them to have a Seder, and one of the spouses is not Jewish. So it's a similar shaila. So the best thing to happen is if Yantif is Shabbos, then there's no shaila. But if it's Shabbos, but if it's not Shabbos, so then it's a shaila. So there's situations where you need to have a non-Jew over. And so those are some of the toughest situations where these halachos come up. And so we're going to go through the sugya. I don't know if we're going to finish the whole thing today, and if we want to go into more depth, that could be one of the topics for Shavuos night. It's not endless.
No, I mean, it's endless stuff. I have like 10 other questions.
Okay. Fine. So we'll start learning it. Write down your questions for me, and we'll see if I already have the answers to most of them for Shavuos night, and if not, maybe we'll do this then.
The similar one, the simplest question: how many times can you invite somebody for Shabbos, knowing that they're not going to stay overnight?
That's a different shaila. It's a different shaila. That's not in regard to cooking. It's a separate shaila. It's a big shaila. Can you invite someone for Shabbos if you know they're going to drive? Right. So that, it's a similar situation, but it's a completely different shaila. So and that one has to do more with lifnei iver, because lifnei iver lo titein michshol. So they by you inviting them, you're gonna cause them to do a malacha. Right, you know they're gonna drive either to you or after you. So that it's a shaila in lifnei iver. But this is a shaila in bishul and yantif. It's a very similar situation, but it's a completely different shaila. And it's an important question. So we're on 21A1, Larry. Masiv Rav Chana Bar Chanilai. Excuse me, I'm in the wrong place here. Okay, I'm Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, Yisrael, Tov the Efshel Chazayis Basar B'lo Shchita. So we just said, did we have this in the name of Rav Chisda? So we're in the last paragraph on 21A, actually the second to last paragraph. Amr of Chisda, an animal that's half owned by a Jew. So Danny, it's probably a different page in yours, but we're still on Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Right, because see where the buyer, so we're still over here. You have the equal here. Amr of Chisda. So Chisda said that the animal is partially owned by a Jew and partially owned by a non-Jew. You're allowed to shech the animal on Yom Tov, even though a part of the animal doesn't belong to the Jew, it's for the non-Jew, because it's impossible for the Jew to eat any part of his meat from his part of the animal without shechting it. However, what if you have a dough that's partially owned by a Jew and partially of a non-Jew? Also, you're not allowed to bake that on Yom Tov, because while you're kneading it, you're able to split it up and say, this is the Jew's piece, so I could bake this on Yom Tov. That's a non-Jew's piece. I'm not allowed to bake that on Yom Tov. Behema, you can't do it. You can't shech half an animal. But if they own the dough in partnership, you could split the dough before you bake it. The dough. Because I can't shecht only the Jew's part of the animal and not shecht the non-Jew's part of the animal. So if I want to eat from the animal, I have to shech the whole thing. But the dough, I can split the dough before I bake it. So I can only bake my part, the Jew's part. I'm able to bake my part without having to bake his part. Matzah Rav Chana Bar Chanilai asked, Isas Klavim. So Isas Klavim literally means dough for dogs. So we'll see it's not necessarily dog biscuits, but also from the Gemara, it seems in those times, you remember the Gemara says that when you have treifa meat, like helav tasrichanoso, it seems they weren't so big on kibbles in those days for his dog food. They would give the dogs more natural, healthy, I don't know, healthy, but raw meat. So isas klavim. So it was primarily made for dogs, but bisman sharon ochlim mimena. If the shepherds also eat from it, chayeves b'chala, you have to take chala from the dough and give it to the kohen. Uma arvada, and you could use it if you're making an eruv, whether to but if you're making an eruv chatzeros to combine different chatzeros into one group for Shabbos that they'll be able to carry from each other, you could use that as the bread that you collect or the matzah that you collect. And you can make a shtufe muvos, which again is similar to, except you're combining different alleyways, different chatzeros that open into one common area. So that's the eruv chatzeros, and then several of the chatzeros open into one mavoy. So like it's kind of like a small street, and the different courtyards open up into that street. So then, let's call it entrance A, B, C, and D. And now each of those entrances has several buildings within them that open into a common courtyard. So the different buildings that open into a similar courtyard that we'll call entrance A, they need a eruv chatzeros if they want to carry from different places within that. And if they want to carry from entrance A to entrance D, let's say, or between the different, then you take from the different ones. And so everyone that shares that mavoy, that small street or alleyway, then they could carry to each other. It's a form of eruv. So if the humans, the shepherds, will eat from this, it's considered halachic bread. You need to take challah. You could use it to make an eruv chatzeros or shtufe muvos umavarchan Allah. you make a bracha on it. Umezamnela, you could even make a zimun if you have three people eating together. V'nefes b'Yom Tov, you could bake it on Yom Tov because it's being baked for humans. And if you made it in less than 18 minutes, you could even use it as matzah. So why can you make this on Yom Tov? You could separate and say, oh, the shepherds aren't going to need all this, so only make the amount that people need. And then it wouldn't be isas klavim, it would be regular baked for humans. But according to this, we're making it for the dogs and for the humans together. And since we know you're not allowed to bake, we saw the drasha lachem v'lo leklavim. You're allowed to bake on Yom Tov for yourselves, but not for dogs. The same way that if you have a dough that's partially owned by a Jew and partially by a non-Jew, you have to separate the dough, so you're not baking the non-Jews. You should have to do that here too. You shouldn't be allowed to bake the part for the dogs on Yom Tov. What?
You're not supposed to eat before you feed your dog or anyone.
That's true too, but you don't have to give them this thing that you cooked on Yom Tov, or you have to cook something beforehand.
I understand.
You have to feed them, but you don't have to feed them this freshly baked stuff, bread, kibble, dog biscuits.
Yes, I know it's hard to imagine, but let's imagine you don't have any other food but for yourself.
You wouldn't be able to make it for them.
Right. So you need to feed the dog for them. Animal. So.
I don't know. So you should give them something that doesn't have to be cooked. They could eat raw meat. It's a dog. Yeah. But you're saying that you didn't have bread from before Yom Tov. But you have to give them something that wasn't cooked on Yom Tov for them. Or if after your meal you had leftovers, but you asked about feeding it before. So I don't. So the Gemara says, Shani Isas Klavim Hoava Efshel Faisim Ben Avela. Isas Klavim is different because you could have fed the dogs with nevela meat, with Kyrian. It's something that died itself, an animal that died itself, so they don't need to eat this food. So therefore, you didn't bake this knowing that you were for sure going to be giving it to them. But if it was Isas Klavim that the shepherds, the humans wouldn't eat, then it's 100%. Everyone agrees you're not allowed to bake that on Yom Tov. So now we had a similar thing like this a few dapim ago. Did a certain Amora hold of the din of Hoel? The Hoel, since you could have done this in this situation, it would have been okay. So even in other situation, it's okay. So now we're going to take a small detour here and say, does Rav Chisda really agree this halach of Hoel? We learned that if someone baked on Yom Tov for the day after Yom Tov, Rav Chisda Amar Loka, Rav Chisda says he gets malchus for doing the malacha on Yom Tov that he didn't have a permission to. So, meaning, even in a case where you didn't have any treif meat to give them, since if you would have had meat, you could have given it to them, you're allowed to give them from this isas klavim that you baked on Yom Tov. So, does Rav Chisda hold of Hoel va'id marov from Yom Tov l'chol? Rav Chisda Amar Loka. Rav Chisda says you get malchus for cooking on Yom Tov, which is for cooking in a non-permitted way on Yom Tov. So that's a los aseh, meaning on Yom Tov, these malachos are a los aseh, a regular lav. You would get malchus. And Yom Kippur, it's kares, and on Shabbos it's misas beis din. But if there's no beis din on Shabbos, there's also an isur kares. Rabbi Amar Eino Loka. Rabbi says you don't get malchus for cooking on Yom Tov or baking on Yom Tov for after Yom Tov. Rav Chisda Amar Loka. Why does Rav Chisda say you get malchus? Lo amrinan hoel mikale orchem chazile. He doesn't say since if guests happen to come, he can feed the guests with this. Hashanami chazile. So this food is also allowed for him now. No, but you're not planning on any guests coming, so therefore there's no heter. Rabbi Amar Eno Loke, Amrinan Hoel. And Rabbi says you don't get Malchus. We say, since I cooked it now, if someone would come between now and the end of Yantif, I would be able to feed it to them, even if no one came, and I'm not planning on anyone coming, it's not prohibited. So the Gemara says, Ela lo tema hoel ve'efshar, Ela could go into Eastland Nevela. So we can't say hoel, since it's possible only in a case where you do have the meat. Vade efshar lepaisim nevela. In that case, you could have fed the animals nevela. So we're saying that he doesn't have. So if you do have meat and the dogs don't want it, so, and instead of saying, okay, if you don't want it, that's take it or leave it, and you. So then you give him the dog biscuit. But see, it's not good to call dog biscuits because then we don't think it's possible for humans. But this is edible for
They
humans.
still won't come back, yeah.
What?
They still won't come back.
With the people.
Yeah,
Right. Well,
that's one thing you do if you don't. want
what's it
people
called? A
coming back,
certain
yeah.
factory
Yeah.
where we used to it was a small side factory not connected to the rest of the factory, so it had much less kashrus issues. A big issue in factories is that in order to save energy, they have these big like hoods where the steam that's coming out from the pots and stuff, it's going back out, and they're recycling it because if it's already 120 degrees right now, it's easier to return that to boiling than to take 40-degree water and warm that up to boiling. So these big factories, all different parts of the factories, all it collects the steam in it, and it's a central steam. So if you would make kosher in one part, if they're making not kosher in any other part, it would trafe up the whole thing because the particles that are coming up from these kettles or whatever they're using is getting mixed with the water, and you're using water from that stuff. So it's a big issue. So there was a certain factory. There was a small part there was a big complex, but they had one thing. It was its own standalone thing, and then they ended up they got a big contract, and they only make like animal food for there now, and the workers love it because because if you're making stuff with meat or chicken, you need USDA, a high level of supervision from the government. If you're not making, you only need FDA, which is not as strict. And if you have dog food, you need neither. So it's much less restrictions in regards to being clean and this and that and certain restrictions. So the workers I was told, because I haven't been there since it became the animal food place, but the workers were happy because it's a lower stress because if it gets contaminated, the rules aren't that strict for animal food. Okay, Bami name Rav Huna. So they asked Rav Huna, Hani b'nei Baga, these villagers, that it was forced upon them to bake, meaning soldiers came. So again, it's something I think we mentioned other times. Part of it's not the Second Amendment. It's isn't one of the amendments in the Bill of Rights says that they're not allowed to quarter soldiers in private people's houses. And we know that in many other countries, especially in Europe during the 20th century, soldier would come into a town and demand, they'd take the rooms for themselves and make people cook for them and things like that. The Constitution, that can't happen legally here, but they so the soldiers were forcing these villagers to bake for them on Yom Tov, malafot Yom Tov. Is it mutter to bake for them on Yom Tov or not? So Amr Lahu, he told them chazina. Well, it depends. I mean, literally, chazina means we have to see chazi, but it says it depends. It depends. If they let you give some of the bread to a little kid and they let it happen, the soldiers aren't makbid on it. They don't get mad if you do that. Then every bread that we bake can be given to a kid. It's theoretically possible to be given to a kid. It can't be given to the adults because it's for these non-Jewish soldiers. It's not these stuff that's being baked is not. They're not going to let adult Jews eat from it, but if they let the kids eat from it, so then we say every loaf you made could have gone to a kid, so it's mutter. V'shari and it's mutter. The ilav, but if they don't even let you give the bread to a kid, so you're not allowed to. So meaning, is it considered being baked for a Jew or is it being baked not for a Jew? So if they let you give to a kid, then we could say, be lenient and say it could be, it's like it's given to a Jew, so it's okay. But if they don't let you give it to your Jewish kid, they want every single scrap for themselves, then it's not being cooked at all for a Jew, and there's no heter. V'atanya, but we learned in the Brayso, Ma'isa b'Shimon hatimni, shelo ba'emesh b'Beis hamedrash. So Shimon hatim, well, it says timni, so it seems, it says here, so Timnas is a place where Shimshon's wife was from. Timnas. Shirachi says he was from that. I mean, modern, well, not even modern, because it's in there's a pasuk in Yecheskel, is it? Mi Teiman ba. Teiman happens to be what we call Yemen in Hebrew. But there was a city where Shimshon was connected to called Timnas. So he didn't come to the Beis Medrash. It seems that it was on Yantif. Well, we'll see from the context that he didn't come on Yantif to the public learning. B'Shachar Tzor Yehuda ben Bava. At Shachris, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava met him. Didn't we see Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava on the previous daf as a Talmud of Shammai? Yeah, it was at the last line of Chaf Amud Aleph. Oh no, that was Bava Mebuta. Sorry. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, I think, according to many opinions, was one of the Asar Harugei Malchus, because he gives smicha to Talmidim of with Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, and the Rome in between the Roman said wherever he gave smicha, the whole city will be killed out. So he went in the middle of nowhere in between two cities and gave smicha to 5 people, and they spared him with hundreds of stabbed him hundreds of times. Amar Lo, they said, why didn't you come yesterday to the Beis Medrash? Amar Lo, he said, a group of soldiers came to our city. They wanted to snatch everything from the whole city. So we shafted a calf for them and fed them. And then we were able to get them go in peace without them doing anything worse to the city. So he's saying that we shechted this calf for non-Jewish soldiers, is what he's saying. So Amar Lo, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava said, I'm curious, or I'm not sure if the benefit that you got from it, from the fact that they didn't take everything from the city, that if you didn't gain more than what you lost because you did an avera by shachting for the non-Jewish soldiers on Yantif. So Rashi says that these particular soldiers, the word baleshes, before we I think a few lines up we had the word b'nei chela. The b'nei chela. Those are one types of soldiers. These baleshes, Rashi says it's a big group of non-Jewish bands that they look to plunder places. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says you may have gained by not losing your physical possessions, but you're going to lose by punishment for having shefted and cooked for non-Jews on Yantif. Because the Torah says you do malacha for you on Yantif. So the malacha, which we already explained a few times in the Masechta here, was the drasha of when it says malacha and it's a Parshas Bo, it means related to cooking on Yantif, it's only lachem for you and not for non-Jews. So v'amai. So why did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava so critical of them? Hachazi lemechamine. If they shechted the calf, Jews could have eaten from it also. It was chazi. It was possible that Jews could have eaten from it. So why was Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava so critical? So Rav Yosef egel treif avoy. Rav Yosef says it was not kosher. It had a certain injury that it was considered a treifa. So even if you shut it properly, Jews couldn't eat from it. So it was not possible to have been eaten by Jews. So then v'hachazi leklavim, but the Jews could have fed from this treif calf to their own dogs. So even though they're cooked, so based on something I said, you should have an answer for me, but the Gemara is going to say it, so I'm not going to, we'll just see what the Gemara says. Tonight, it's machlokas tanaim. The Tanya, we learned in the Beitza, however, anything that is eaten for any soul, that alone, or only that, can be done for you. From the fact that it said for every soul, I would have thought that it even includes animals that you own, and you could cook for them. As we also see, in regard to killing someone else's animal, if you kill a behemoth soul, you have to pay back. So nefesh could include an animal. So tamalomar lachem. Therefore, the person says lachem to you, as we turn to chaf aleph amid beis, lachem v'lo leklavim. You could only cook for you and not for your own domesticated pets that depend on you for food. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. These are the Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Kiva Omer Afilu Nefesh Beima B'Mashma. Rabbi Kiva says it's the pasuk's implication is that you could even cook for your pets. Im came out lachem. So why does it say lachem v'lo de kochavim? You can cook for you, but you can't cook for non-Jews. Why did Rabbi Kiva feel that you could include the animal, your pets, so you could cook for them on Yantif, but you're not allowed to cook for non-Jews? I will include klavim, your pets, your dogs, you're allowed to cook for them on Yantif because you have the responsibility to feed them. They depend on you for food. But I will exclude. I will say that the pasuk is excluding non-Jews because they do not depend on you for food. So, according to this brisa here that we have, according to Rabbi Kiva, you are allowed to cook for your pet on Yantif, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili does not allow it. So even if this calf that they shechted on Yantif for the bandits the pillaging bandits were not, it was a treifa that the Jews could eat for. According to Rabbi Akiva, it wasn't a problem, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was going according to the sheet of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that they were not allowed, that you're not even allowed to prepare food on Yantif for your domesticated pets. But we saw earlier. So Tosfos says that Reb Shmuel from Ivra, I don't know what city that was, in the name of his brother Reb Moshe, paskins like Rabbi Yossi Aglili here. Because the brisa that we saw on the previous Amud about the Isas Klavim, the bread that is primarily baked for dogs, indicates that we're not allowed, and that's an anonymous brisa. It seems to be according to him that you're not allowed to cook for animals on Yantif. See, the problem is, I mean, not the problem. The issue is if that's how he paskins, it seems to him that you would be that you would be allowed to cook for a non-Jew. Unless you say if you're not even allowed to cook for your domesticated animal, you're certainly not allowed to cook for your animal. I mean for non-Jews. So meaning does Rabbi see it's a little bit difficult to say Rabbi Yossi Aglili would forbid you to cook for your domesticated pet, but then allow you to cook for a non-Jew who doesn't even know, which Rabbi Kiva's mentioned that far. I might think so. You're because they depend on you for food, so you cook for them, but not for a non-Jew. So it seems that both of them hold that you can't cook for a non-Jew. The only nafkamina is, according to Rabbi Kiva, you can cook for your pet, and according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you can't cook for your pet. But they both agree that you can't cook for a non-Jew. Amarle by the Rav Yosef. Abai said to Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef Glili Dam Lechem Lo Leklavim Hani Sufli Lechevasa Hechishnin Lo Yom Tov. According to Rabbi Yosef Glili, that you're only allowed to cook for you and not for your pets. These date pits. How are you allowed to throw them to your animals on Yom Tov? So since they're pits, and so now there's nothing we can do with them. There because it's not, and if you're not allowed to feed your pet, they should be muktzah. So how could people throw them to their pets to eat? So amarle hoa b'chazul asaka. They're not muktzah because it's not that you could feed them to your animal. Excuse me, he doesn't say that. Well, see if you look, the article translate hechi shadina lahu means they translate it in bold. How do we throw date pits to animal on Yom Tov? It should be muktzah. I don't know if it's actually saying that you're throwing it to the animal. Shadina lahu might just be how do you move the date pits? We assumed because we assuming that you could feed it to your animal, but now we know we can't feed it to the animal. It should be mukta completely. How do we move them at all? So amarle hoav chazul asaka. You're able to put them in your oven, and you could use it as fuel in your fire. Heinach be'abeshta. So that's only good if they're dried. But if they're fresh, even the pits are not dry enough, and it's not going to make it. You can't use it as fuel in the fire. Now the question is, you're not allowed to add fuel to the fire on Yom Tov. Oh, you are allowed if you're cooking, right? If it's already on, you can add fuel, but you can't start a new one, right? Okay. But if they're not dried out, and so there's moisture in them, so they can't be used as fuel in the fire, so they should be muktzah. So amarle chazul hasagadal. So if you have a really big fire, you can use it. So it's true if you have a small fire, putting these non-dried out pits is going to make the fire bad because of the moisture in them. But if it's a real big fire, you're able to use these not dried out date figs in a big fire. So tinach be Yom Tov. So now we understand why they're not muktzah on Yom Tov. But b'Shabbos me'ikol meimar. But on Shabbos, you can add fuel to a fire. So they should be muktzah on Shabbos. So mitalinu hu agav rifta. We can move them on top of a piece of bread. According to Shmuel, the Amar Shmuel, Adam also called charcha b'pas. You can do anything you need with bread. So even though you're not supposed to treat bread in a way that would make it disgusting and that you wouldn't want to eat from it anymore, Shmuel's makel and saying you could use bread to help you do other things. So you could put these dates on it, so the bread itself was edible. You could put these muktzah things on it and then move it with that. There even is a halacha that if someone passed away on Shabbos, you can move. So the body's nothing to do with it's muktzah. But if you put a loaf of bread on it, and then you could move the body because you're moving the bread. So I don't know if that's completely based on Shmuel's halacha, but that's a similar halacha that we have. Uflagina Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Okay, so Rav Huna about if the non-Jews will let a Jew eat from part of the food, you could cook it in Yom Tov. He argued on Yeshua ben Levi. Tam Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi mazamnin tzanach b'Shabbos. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says you're allowed to invite a non-Jew to eat with you on Shabbos. You're not allowed to invite a non-Jew on Yom Tov. So this is the halacha we paskin like, and that's why the whole shaila comes up about inviting non-Jews on Yom Tov. There's a gzeira, a rabbinic decree. You might cook more food because you invited them, and now you're cooking for a non-Jew on Yom Tov. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, "Afilu b'Shabbos namilo mishum shiurei kosos." You can invite them even on Shabbos because of the leftover in their cup. When you serve them wine, so we assume that pagans, whenever they have wine, they pour a little bit out to their avodah zaras. So once they've done that with their wine, the wine is now, well, I'm going to jump the gun here a little bit, but it's asur ba'ana because it was actually they poured libations from it to avodah zara. So there's nothing we could do with it. So it's also besides. So if it was not Shabbos, you'd have to throw it in the river where no one would get any benefit from it. But on Shabbos, it's muksa to do it because you can't do anything with it on Shabbos now. Even you would have to leave the cup on the table, and that would be bad. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov says you can't even invite them on, and this is specifically pagans. The halacha about inviting them for Shabbos seems to include any non-Jew, even though they're not pagans who worship and different avodah zaras. But this halacha is only applied to pagans who whenever they have wine, they pour some out for their avodah zaras. What?
Don't consider case of
Correct. This is talking about non-mavushal wine, but it's a bit of a question. Like I haven't read it for a bunch of years, but the Wall Street Journal used to do. Maybe they still do. I just haven't looked for it. The wine column, like a month before Pesach, would talk about kosher wines, and they talk about mavushal also, just to know what it is. But the thing is that nowadays, do the people consider mavushal wine? So the reason that yain mavushal works is because by boiling it, it lowers the quality of the wine to the extent that these pagans wouldn't use it for their avodah zarah anymore because it's too low quality. But the way that they write about these wines, but that's the problem. The way they write about these wines nowadays, they're saying it's not, the quality isn't reduced. So I don't know if that work anymore. And just say and I mean nowadays you even hear if you buy wine, you can't leave it in your hot car if your car is above 80 degrees because it's going to ruin the wine. So I don't know.
But they've changed.
I saw how to do the bushel in Rabbi. But ultra violet light. They had a special light, ultraviolet, and they moved it to the barrel.
Well, because some of them do it with pasteurization.
Yeah,
But pasteurization.
Muslim changed it years ago. They inject steam, and they don't boil the wine anymore like they used to.
Yeah, they didn't do
They stopped that years ago.
Right. So some to the badats in Yerushalayim, if it's only through pasteurization, it doesn't reach the actual boiling level, so they don't consider that mavushal.
Why did they boil?
Yeah, because once it was boiled, the halacha is that it makes the quality of the wine bad. It's considered low quality wine, and these pagans wouldn't be respectful enough to their deities to pour from it because they would give a good wine, not garbage wine, or not this low quality wine that was boiled. But just from a science perspective, I'm not sure how ultraviolet light, meaning infrared is heat, so that would heat it up. But if it's okay. So infrared, I mean ultraviolet.
Maybe, I'm thinking it's like
No, but that it might be more similar to like a microwave. So that could make sense. It's not heat, but it's a microwave. So depending on the size of the wine molecule, so the right wavelength, the same way a microwave. So that might be okay. Nami. But if we're worried about what's left up in the cups, our wines we shouldn't either. So it seems that at this point we're not exactly worried about. We're just worried that whatever left at the bottom of your cup is disgusting and it's muktzah because there's nothing to do with it. So, and we'll see that the way I explained it, the Gemara doesn't hold that way yet. It'll hold that way in a few lines, just because there's nothing to do with the leftover of the cups from their cups. The Gemara at this point isn't assuming yet that they poured libations for their avodah zarah from the cup. So ihachi didanami, but our cups should also be muktzah when we're done with it because drinking from it during the meal. So now it's disgusting. So didan chazul tarnagolam. Ours we can put it in front of the chickens to drink. I guess they liked having drunk chickens in those days. Did hu nami chazul tarnagolam, but their wine also poured in front of the chickens to drink. So now the Gemara says, did hu isuri hanan inhu? There is permitted to have any benefit from it because they poured some libations for their avodah zarah from it. Meaning, in those days, it didn't have to be a big thing. It didn't have to be a big pour. It could just be a few drops. They just tip it over a drop, and that's in honor of their avodah zarah. Let's try to get to the Mishnah. Well, tavli avokasa. So why don't we use even though there's wine in it, but we say we need to move the cup. So similar to what we said, if you can move the date pits on top of a piece of bread. Let's move the wine that's in the cup because I need to move the cup itself. So Milo Amarava, didn't Rava says Metatlin Kanuna Agav Kidmei, you can use it's some type of shovel or because of the ashes that are in it, and you might need the ashes for to cover spills or something. Meaning, even though the ashes themselves are muktzah, but you said before Shabbos, I'm going to use the ashes that are in there to cover spills. So because you have a purpose for them that's mutter to do on Shabbos, it makes the whole shovel, not just the ashes themselves, not muktzah. I mean, it's not a regular shovel. It's a shovel that has some type of receptacle on it that the ashes are in. The way I would explain it, I don't know what they had in the time, but nowadays they have the dustpans that you when you put it down, it goes down and it's surrounded on it's a 5-sided thing. And when you put it down, you could sweep in, and then when you pick it up, it folds up so the crumbs don't fall out. So it's something like that. Except that it was used for ashes. So even though this type of shovel thing is muktzah because you can't do anything for Shabbos with it, but the ashes with it, because you said I'm going to use those ashes in case I have a spill on Shabbos to cover it up with it. So the kli, which otherwise would have been muktzah, isn't muktzah. So here, apagav the ikal leshiv even if there's broken pieces of wood that's mixed up with the ashes, but because I have something that's useful, I could even carry the whole thing, which isn't useful. So the cup itself is useful, even though the stuff inside might be Isra'ana. So why don't we say you could carry that? So the Gemara says, Hasam lav Yisra'ana ninhu. The ashes are not, you're allowed to get benefit from them. It may be muktzah on Shabbos, but if when Shabbos is over, you could get benefit. You could use those little pieces of, those little scraps of wood for something else. But Hafi Yisra'ana ninhu. But this wine is Yisra'ana. So we don't allow you to the leniency that we use in regard to the date pits on bread or these ashes, even though there's useless wood pieces in it in this shovel thingy. But this wine, because it's Isra, because the pagans poured for their avodah zarah from it, we don't even allow you to carry it inside the cup, even though the cup itself could be useful. Amar le Rav Acha B'Gdifti Ravina. Rav Acha B'Gdifti asked Ravina, "L'hevi ki grif shel rei shouldn't at least be like, I guess in those days, a chamber pot. In those days, they didn't have indoor plumbing, and sometimes they needed to use something inside the house as a toilet. So it's pretty nasty to have it in the house. So there's a heter to move that on Shabbos, just because not even though it's not useful for anything. I mean, potentially you could use it for fertilizer, I guess, but it's considered so disgusting. You're allowed to move it out of your way on Shabbos, to dump it where it belongs because it's so disgusting. So to have this leftover wine on the table is also pretty bad. So why don't we say that it's like a graf shel rei? So Amar le v'chiyoshin graf shel rei lechatchila. So you're right, but we're not allowed to plan on making a certain utensil into a potty right now that we'll have to use it on Shabbos. But when you're having when you're inviting it, so that's if it was needed. Someone had an emergency and they weren't going to be able to make it to the outhouse in time. So they're allowed to do this. But if you invite a non-Jew, you know you're going to have the cups, and so you can't knowingly put yourself in a situation where you're going to have to deal with it. Ad b'rei Rav Lamar Shmuel v'darash. So this is interesting. One of the trickiest words in Targum in Aramaic to translate is the word vayikach, or dabar. Dabar seems to be when you're taking another person. It doesn't seem to be if you're taking an inanimate object or even taking an animal. I knew it was a question, and Rabbi Margolis, Zichrono Livracha, who was a big expert in Aramaic, I didn't know how big of a question it was, but I saw the differences, and I said over his whole thing about when certain times when Onkelos uses it and does it, and he just laughed. And later he told me, because it's a bigger issue, even though I noticed some of the things, but it's one of the most complicated words in Targum Onkelos. But here he led another person, so there's no problem in using that word. And he was teaching Torah. You can invite a non-Jew on Shabbos. You're not allowed to invite him on Yom Tov. So this is like Rabbi Shua Levi. So he passed to Rabbi Shua Levi. You're not allowed to invite a non-Jew on Yom Tov because there's a gzera. You might cook more food for him. 21b3. Meremar Umar Zutra Kav Mikluhu Nachum Yom Tov. When Meremar and Mar Zutra, if non-Jews would come on Yom Tov, so they didn't invite, but if non-Jews showed up, Amrulay, they would say to the non-Jew, Inichala b'may detrichalon, if you're okay with what I prepared for myself, Mutav, it's okay. Vimlav Tirchi Sera Daita Dachlo Tarchinan. But if not, I'm not going to make anything more for you. And this is the basis for any heter, that you can't invite a non-Jew, but if a non-Jew shows up, you could feed them from what you have, but you can't warm anything else up. So the main heter for the situation is not to invite the non-Jew, and if they happen to show up, you didn't cook anything for them because you didn't invite them. So obviously there's more details, and if we want, we can go into more detail that on Shavuos night, but that's the sugya that we just covered.